Thank you very much for organizing this great event, and I'm happy I can be here with you and share some of my experiences and my work with refugee communities. So I'm going to talk today about social policies for refugees. I will shortly explain what I mean. Just the photo you can see in the back of my presentation is from one of events in support of refugee communities, many of which were taking place during last year in New York City. So, what am I going to I will introduce myself and tell some more about myself during the panel that I have in the afternoon. So right now I will just focus on this presentation. So I would like to tell you something more about assistance that is provided for refugees in the United States. And I call it social policies. What I mean by that are federally funded programs which are provided by different non-profit, usually faith-based organizations across the country. And I'm studying these organizations and this assistance thanks to the generous support of AAUW. So first of all, just to clarify who are we talking about, we talked today and yesterday a lot about refugees. So just to specify, in 2016 there was around over 84,000 people who were resettled to the United States and received here a refugee status. And there was around over 25,000 people who were granted asylum here, which is another form of protection. And we heard different scenarios today. So just to clarify, refugees can get to the United States in many different ways. Usually when the number that I just mentioned, 84,000 of resettled refugees, these are people who are granted asylum, who are granted protection outside the United States after a very severe long-term process of vetting, and then they are brought with the assistance of these agencies to the United States. Another way for refugees or asylees getting to the United States is while applying for asylum. In being already in the United States, so people would enter with visa, like tourist visa or student visas, and then after recognizing their situation, they can be granted asylum here. Another way of getting as a refugee or asylee to the United States is applying or asking for protection at the border, when crossing the border. So obviously this is the case usually for people coming from Central and South America, and it happens on the southern borders of the United States. And the last scenario is a case which can be comparable to what we have seen yesterday in the movie. So when a person crosses the border, not necessarily having proper documents, and afterwards wants to apply for asylum here, which means that is usually detained. So if we took a case of a woman who we watched yesterday, if I understood correctly her situation, in some point she was crossing Hungarian border during the night, which wasn't obviously legal. So the way, had it happened in the United States, she would probably start with being detained, and then over the period of time, maybe she would be allowed to get international protection in the United States. But bottom line, however refugees get to the United States, they are eligible for different forms of assistance, which is provided from federal funded programs, and this is what I'm going to talk about. So just to add, additionally to this group that we have just described, there are also different temporary protected statuses, so-called, which is in 2016 we had 300,000 such people who were granted protection and also eligible for these forms of assistance. So for example, to give you some real life examples, Afghani translators are usually brought, who are helping American army, would be brought to the United States that way. Now, this program of resettling refugees in the United States is the largest in the world, but not the largest in numbers. So no other country resettles so many refugees as the United States, but it's not the largest per capita if we count how many people are being resettled compared to the population, so then it's rather Sweden, for example. Then refugees constitute less than 10% of immigrants in the United States, and United States developed its current system of protecting refugees in 1980, and since then over 3 million people were resettled to the country. And on the beginning they were resettled usually to large so-called immigrant gateway cities such as New York or LA, but in recent years increasingly refugees are resettled to smaller communities, and in some of them, like in some cities in uptown New York State, refugees become the largest immigrant population. Now, over the time, different groups were resettled to the United States, and in general, the program of resettling refugees very much reflects foreign policy. So, on the beginning of the program, these were usually refugees resettled from Southern Eastern Asia. In recent years, this is mostly from Middle Eastern countries. I will make this presentation available if you want to study it more thoroughly. Now, now the policies themselves. So there are different parts of American administration involved in providing these programs. So, for example, placement of refugees and the time of transitioning, that's the function of State Department Bureau for Population, Refugees and Migration. And refugees are eligible to receive different forms, participate in different programs which are just targeted at them and not other populations, such as I will discuss it longer, for example, matching grant program. And then they are also eligible to participate due to low income in all of other programs that are available in the United States, such as SNAP for minimum food stamps or TANF. This is alternative to using other forms of protections. And these programs, which are specifically designed for refugees, are available for quite a short period of time after their arrival. Refugees or asylees have to apply for them within 30 days after arriving to the country. And then through participation in them, they can receive different forms of assistance. I will specify it in a moment. Now, who is providing all of those forms of assistance? And for those of you who are interested in volunteering for refugees, this is important information. So there are 9 voluntary agencies, so-called VOLACs, operating across the country. And each of them is, or most of them are kind of like a network that have agencies in different parts of the country. Some of them, such as IRC, International Rescue Committee, provide their services directly. Others use some others use, in some cases, outsourcing, are outsourcing their services to some other organizations. Most of them, as you can see on the list, are faith-based. So we have Church World Service among one of the largest one. We have Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS. We have also Catholic Charities, and which I think we'll listen later on today. These are one of the many organizations which you can look up if you're interested in volunteering for refugees. Many of the, or some, maybe not many, but some of the services that they provide are offered through, with the assistance of volunteers. And what is important is that these organizations work very differently across the states. I think IRC is the only one which has like a very strict standard, but even in that case, there are differences whether we're talking about some large office hiring 50 people, or are we talking about office which has five people working with refugees. And now, different programs that are provided for refugees, they are funded through this refugee resettlement program and available through these different populations that I mentioned. They have one major goal, which is also the goal of most of American welfare programs: economic self-sufficiency as quickly as possible after arrival to the United States. And what does it mean, economic self-sufficiency? It means earning a total family income at a level that enables a family unit to support itself without recipient of cash assistance grant. That's how it's defined. And this kind of shapes in a very important way how the assistance operates. Because often the grants are pretty low, and the idea is that people will become self-sufficient within a couple of months. To give you a comparison, which I'm not saying is a better one, but in Europe, usually refugees are eligible for 2-year assistance that is covering their living expenses, and during that time they receive intensive language training. Which I'm not saying is not, I'm not drawing this comparison to say how bad it is here, because there are other problems with European assistance. So, as I mentioned, there are several programs that are included or offered for refugees. They are included in this, funded from this refugee resettlement program, and they are provided by usually the agencies that are listed, or there are locally, maybe some other, in New York there are locally some more organizations. So for example, it's matching grant, refugee social service program, refugee cash assistance program, and additionally to that, refugees also can participate in welfare programs. So what do these programs mean in practice? In practice means that refugees have assistance to case management, meaning a person who assists from the very beginning with getting social security and all necessary documentation, also applying for different welfare assistance or enrolling to matching grant and other program. Again, in different organizations, because the system is so diverse and provided by so many different agencies, it can also include assisting in going to doctor appointment, going with children to enroll them to schools, any other emergency situation, assisting in any other emergency situations that can appear. Then there is also language training, so ESL. Cultural orientation classes, and direct cash allowances. As I said, many of them are provided with the assistance of volunteers. And there are tremendous differences if we look at how these services are provided. I am conducting my research in New York City and in New Jersey. And obviously the differences are great if we compare the resources available for refugees in, let's say, Elizabeth, New Jersey and New York City. That's hard really to compare. And the same service, such as ESL, so agencies are supposed to provide English courses. So the way it's provided varies from having access to 5 days a week, couple hours English training, to once a week training provided through volunteers, 2 hours weekly. I've seen such situations. So it's really great diversity, sometimes great quality, sometimes much lower. Now, I mentioned that in most of EU countries, the assistance is hard, uncomparable in the amount of cash transfers that refugees receives, and language training and so on. But also, if we look at short-term outcomes for refugees, there's also no comparison. I mean, in the way that US are doing much better. So if we look just at the employment rate, it looks like refugees are more likely to be employed than US-born population, at least for male. And then, so that should be a great news. Like we can think the program works, right? But then the question is, what kind of jobs do they get? And that's a bit of a problem, because there is the major goal of the program is self-sufficiency as soon as possible. So what kind of job can you get as soon as possible, like a month after your arrival to the US? Well, usually that's entry-level jobs. You can say like on the bottom of the labor market. And for some people it's great and good enough. Their quality of life is much higher being in the US compared to where they come from. But that's not the case for everyone. Some refugees, as we have seen today in the panel, are skilled or highly skilled and would like to progress, but sometimes learning language just takes time, and it's difficult to learn language when you're doing 3 jobs which are all barely allowing you to get above poverty line. So that's a challenge, and it used to be, if we look at the cohort of refugees who arrived in the 80s or in the 90s, that all of those problems were temporary, that yes, it took more time to progress, but people would progress, and their participation in welfare programs would decrease. Their income would increase, and it was just a matter of time. But we also need to be aware that if we think about refugees who are arriving to the United States currently, these are not the same groups which are arriving in the 80s, for example. In the 80s, we had less groups of refugees resettled, so like let's say from 5 countries instead of 100 countries. And for example, 80s and 90s, that was a large wave of refugees resettled from former USSR countries who are coming usually with high education level. And if we look at current populations of refugees, so many cases people are coming, first of all, as I said, from all over the world, which generates greater challenges because you need to provide different services in languages. There is more option to connect to communities, but because maybe the ethnic communities just don't exist yet. So that's a problem. And yes, education level and language skills. So basically, if we think of the future of refugees resettled to the United States, that might not be the pattern. These good outcomes that I have just described might not necessarily be the pattern anymore unless more efforts will be involved in assisting refugees. And I already shortly described the challenges on the ground. So, as I said, the diversity on a local level, how the programs are implemented is just incredible, which sometimes is great if we're talking about places with a lot of resources, but sometimes is not so great if we're thinking about very few resources. And then, as included in the program itself, there is a problem of pushing refugees kind of to the labor market without having time to prepare and get some language skills. And interestingly, even in places with great resources, such as New York City, where refugees and asylees have, for example, access to number of trainings, cultural trainings, very good classes where they can learn about how, I don't know, healthcare system, higher education system works, and so on. So then this element, this problematic goal of getting a job as soon as possible makes it also within the agencies who provide these services to prioritize these kind of interventions that can have great long-term outcomes, but like kind of hard to see outcomes, immediate outcomes. So then these kind of activities are prioritized very low. And when I'm talking to employment consultants who are training refugees, so that's what they are complaining, that they have these classes and hardly no one is coming because caseworkers are scheduling something else during that hours for refugees, else meaning like job interviews or other things. So even in places with great resources, there are problems. And now, yes, when I started studying the refugee resettlement, I was so critical about all of the programs, like so many things doesn't work, how is it even possible that there are such a huge differences and so on. And then suddenly last year, we had a change in administration, and all of my criticism moved to the point, okay, so there are no programs, or everything is kind of sometimes paused. So first of all, we had the executive orders who suspended entry from first 7 Muslim countries, then 6. First suspended refugee resettlement for a certain period of time. What is happening right now is that refugees who have relatives might be resettled and others are not. So what does it mean? What does it mean in practice? First of all, the rate of refugee resettlement dropped already by half, comparing to when we compare 2016 and 17. Then the numbers of resettling refugees are dropping. So for 2017, we are going to have 50,000 refugees resettled. For next year, it's going to be even lower. And the numbers were usually the highest rates of resettling refugees were in 1980s when it was like 200,000 yearly. Then it was dropping to around 100, and now we're getting basically closer to the time from after 9/11 when the program was so severely slowed down. And there are also cuts in budget for agencies resettling refugees. So, and in many agencies, welfare programs, some of the programs that I'm talking about with this language training and so on were just suspended. That's the case in New York City. So just to give you an overview, what does it mean that we hear all the time in the media that program is suspended? What does it mean in practice? So I prepared this presentation last, I was presenting it first last spring, and then we had the travel ban for, the refugee resettlement program was back then suspended for a couple of days. And I was explaining what does it mean suspending a program for a couple of days. So it means that usually, as we've heard, families go through a number of screenings. Each of them is valid, like around 3, each of them is valid for a certain period of time. You have to have different screening for different family members. And in some cases, it's very short period of time that all screenings are valid for all of the families, and this is like a green light, now you can be resettled. In one of the offices, refugee resettlement offices that I'm working with, we were preparing a home for a family to be resettled. They were going to be, during one weekend, I believe, resettled, so they had an apartment rented and everything was ready, and they never arrived. Because back then there was the program was suspended, and then their screenings expired, and that's it. And this is the reality that I was presenting last spring. And it didn't get better. Right now it actually gets worse. The program is just suspended for many people. So all of those people waiting in refugee camps around the world will be just waiting. And their screenings are expiring, and that's what happened. Another thing that happened, I told you about these different social programs that are valid, that you are eligible only to receive it 30 days after your arrival. So when the quota for refugees was officially decreased, so then some of the agencies in New York City, we had like I think 3 months that none of the, out of many agencies were actually providing matching grants, did not enroll people to this program. So what does it mean? It means that for 3 months we had like large population of people who did not get this assistance, and they will not get it anymore, because once the program was reopened, their 30 days after their arrival expired, so they will not have access to many services, direct cash assistance, and so on. Will it help in their integration? Probably not. So just to finish, there are different, what can we do? Well, first of all, as I said, many of the resettling agencies are providing different services with the assistance of volunteers. And just to give you some examples, if a family is being resettled, that is also the case of the special visa holders, which this program is still operating. So people who would help American Army in Afghanistan or in other parts of the world would still be brought to the United States. So volunteers often help with everything, like picking up family from the airport, helping with renting an apartment, gathering furniture to the apartment. Volunteers in many places help with English. So some agencies provide, in New York City we have a program which is like of one-on-one conversations, and this is really great, where a refugee or asylee is assigned to one person. They meet once a week for 2 hours and practice English or general like cultural orientation about the United States. Then you can help in casework. You can take a refugee family for an appointment at a doctor. You can organize trips. I have done, so that's really great. Organize different celebrations, or there are in New York we have also community gardening with refugees organized by IRC, or help out youth academies. Okay.
I don't get any questions, but please, this is so interesting, and I have a dozen questions to ask you. So make yourself available so that we can come and talk with you. We have another speaker right behind you, so thank you so much.